What's happening, gang? You are live back in the Secret Stash. I'm your host, Jesse Abanias, tracking down some of the coolest local people, having some important local conversations, and this one atop the list of somebody, not necessarily what you woke up, thought, that day that you were going to have to tackle, but for a lot of folks, I heard Michelle report earlier, maybe even 50% or more of folks that get into a conversation called I Do, end up having to unravel it at some point in time. So maybe you should be called the law offices of I Don't. Would that work? Michelle Paul hanging out in the stash. By the way, you can track her down at San Diego-divorcelaw.com. Now, I set you up right before the break, Michelle. I said, what was the number one thing, the number one rule, you might say, of what not to do? So I don't know.
All right, really? I got the drum roll. All right, so... we call this affectionately Joe's rule number one.
Oh, it's Joe's rule. She's bringing Joe.
Oh, yeah.
By the way.
So
Joe, by the way, one of her partners hanging out in the studio.
Yeah, Joe's our famous paralegal here in the office.
Yeah.
Joe's rule number one is the client is the enemy.
The client is the enemy.
It is.
That's
true.
Good. Now, I love that, and that's why I set you up for that, because that's very sensational. But now unravel it so people understand what that means.
Rule number one is the client is the enemy we found is true because if there's ever a reason why litigation gets unraveled or goes awry, is because the client signs on to do one thing with us and says, oh, yes, I'm on board and we're going to be the team and this is how the team's going to play it out. And then the client decides, you know what? I'm going to leave the lawyer out of this and I'm going to take care of it myself. And I'm going to go talk to the other side or I'm going to talk to the other opposing counsel. And before you know it, we got a whole new life of its own going on in the case. And more times than not, the case goes south and it's not successful and it's harder and more expensive to clean it up.
And this makes so much sense to the layperson for a couple reasons. Number one is when you're going through, one of the big Ds, like we talked about, death, disability, divorce, it's a very emotional process. We spend a whole first segment even talking about that, like how to unravel that, how to find yourself within that truth when you're going through a situation like this. And then also the byproduct of that is you don't even know what you don't even know, and you start to not even recognize the who that you are in yourself in the first place. Like you start making decisions, and then in retrospect you're like, did I really just say that or do that? Like that the body and the mind under incredible stress. Would you agree? It's like helping people get out of the way of themselves. I think, Joe, is what you said at the break. Like, that's one of the biggest value adds that you can apply to this conversation. And so to kind of reverse engineer that back in, people think to themselves through that poor judgment or the smaller version of themselves, hey, I got into this mess. I can get us out of this. Right?
Well, right. I mean, and that's just seriously one aspect of it. There's, without getting too esoteric with this, but it's so true. The ego is involved, like you said, and they can't just get out of their own way. And let me tell you, I love all my clients, no matter how much they want to be the enemy. That's fine, because you know what? My number one job, and this is the whole reason why I got into this business, is I want to protect. Because you can't protect yourself, and that's why you've called me. There's a reason why they called in the first place. Because if really they could have done it on their own, they would have done it on their own.
That's such a sweet counterbalance, because if the number one rule, as we said it is, rather salaciously, is the client is the enemy, it also is in congruence. You hope symbiotic congruence with the number one job, which is to protect them from themselves. Protect them, period, and then also from themselves, right? Yes. What's a good example of that? Maybe somebody can find themselves in. Maybe you can go back in the not-too-distant past where you just watch somebody totally unravel right before your eyes and end up causing more challenges for them than if they would have tried to fix it in the first place.
Boy, do I give you a really down and dirty one, or do I give you just a...
I think Stash Nation likes it down and dirty, if I could speak on behalf of them.
All right, recently, in the past year, had this... I call her a little girl because, everybody's at this point little to me. She's younger than me, so she's a little girl.
Yeah.
So she comes in, and her biggest fear was... she knew she had to get divorced, and the main thing was she wanted to get her kids, custody of the kids, because the spouse was coming in very, very controlling, and it was this, she didn't know if he was just going to come and go whenever he wanted, and he did. And so we laid it out to her. We said, look, this is the plan. We've got to go in, and, and I asked her point blank, I said, look, are you afraid of your husband? Yes, I'm afraid. And then I said, how are you afraid? Well, I'm afraid he's going to just, take the kids from me. I said, yeah, but how are you afraid? Because I've got to go into a court of law, and I got to argue to a judge that this person is afraid of domestic violence. And in order to get a domestic violence restraining order, it's got to have a lot of teeth in it. And you can't just go in and go, well, I'm kind of afraid he's going to...
moody.
And I get that. And I'm like, I am not going to go back you on this. It ain't going to happen.
Yeah.
You've got to give me a reason.
He's not nice without his coffee. Right?
Believe it or not, sometimes on that level, I get that. And I'm like, I ain't doing it.
Yeah.
Because it's sanctionable conduct if I go in front of a judge and they're going to say, you brought this client into my courthouse. And, there are some legitimate situations going on right now where there are kids getting their butt kicked by their parents or whoever. And this court needs to protect them. And you're bringing this to me? So, lo and behold, I got into the courtroom, and everything we had written down for the court on the documents, the judge point blank asked her, are you afraid? Well, and I looked at her, I went, oh my God. And, oh my God, so we were threatened with sanctions, of course.
Wow.
And, we're kind of, the case has wound down, and it's all in the middle of negotiations, thank God, because we went back to let's get this out of the court system because it's expensive.
Now, was the spouse in the room at that same time?
On the phone.
On the phone.
Yeah.
See, isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Right? Because absent of the presence, they have the voice to be strong. And then as soon as that energy is in the room, they become...
Oh, yes.
Whatever that word is, subservient or, whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Like docile or, whatever.
Under the jail.
Yeah, right.
That's what I say.
Right. So number one rule opposed with the number one job. And I love that frame. So another thing that comes up for me, I think, is, if you could imagine meeting people as far upstream as possible, I got to imagine a question is like, do I even have a case? So it's like, let's say that someone raises their hand, they call you up, they say, hey, Michelle, they maybe find you online or they call you in your toll-free number and they say, hey, here's where I am right now. That's got to be one of the first things they ask, right? Do I even have grounds for this?
Right.
Because no one wants to go down and do the whole dance unless they feel like there's going to be an outcome, right? A respectable outcome. So how do you unravel that? Like someone asks you, hey, do I have a case? What do you do?
Like we spoke about a little bit earlier, I say, look, let's break it down. Give me a timeline. Tell me where it started, tell me where you're at now, and tell me everything in between.
Now, why is the timeline an important context for you?
Well, for me, it keeps me organized because, getting into this business, you've got to just so many variables. I mean, if you're going from A to Z, in order to get to Z, you got to understand all the letters in between and the subparts. And if you don't stay organized, you're dead in the water. You've got to be organized.
Now, how do you do that with only one side of the story, though?
Well, yeah, you have to take that in consideration. Yeah, there's always two sides to the story. So
there's three.
Well, okay.
There's one person's, and then there's the truth, right?
Right, of course. And yeah, what is funny too, and now that the theme of the show or the sub theme is down and dirty here today.
Yeah.
It's a
Stash Nation, baby.
Okay. Yeah. So it's just we find out. Maybe we're representing the wrong client sometimes.
Interesting.
Well, it's not like we don't want to represent the client, but at the same time, we thought at first our client was the one being wrong, and it's like, ooh, you know what? Now we're hearing some more information.
What do you do then?
Well, I mean, of course, we're under an incredible duty to tell the truth. And I mean, as because you're under similar fiduciary obligations to the client.
Absolutely.
But, we have to be truthful to the court and the clients and even the opposing side. So if we know they're lying, we're like, look, there's a gray area and everything, but as far as going forward with your litigation, I'm not going to put my name on a document if that means that it's not truthful. I ain't going to do it. I'm not going to do it. But at the same time...
But how do you know if it's not truthful, though, when that's what they're telling you is the truth?
Sometimes they're just flat out busted. Sometimes you just know, and sometimes you get a feeling for it. So
like in the discovery process, there'll be like a piece of information that comes in, and you're like...
Okay, so what's up with this?
Yeah.
How do I work this out where we get this on paper where it makes some sense?
Right.
You always try to smooth it out. Yes.
Okay, good. So timeline, that's an important part of it. What else?
So, in my mind, I call it the whole, you got the whole gauntlet. It's like someone calls in and if they've got, they want the divorce. They've got the kids, which are minor children that are involved. They've got the property division. They've got assets, whether it's, a couple of cars. We've got cases where we've had to divide assets up to $5 million. So you got.
And then you've also got the judge duties where it's over like a bracelet.
like I said, I've got one right now where the child's becoming a majority and she wants to take the dog.
Right.
And the one spouse not letting her take the dog, and it's just like, so we got to probably go in and ask for permission to get the dog and take care of that for her. But So getting back to the timeline, so you go down the whole gauntlet. So the property division, and is there domestic violence involved? So usually obviously it's a priority thing. So if there's domestic violence, obviously that is number one before the divorce is even final. And then you start with the child custody, because a lot of people go, well, if I have the child and I have her the majority of the time, or him or her, how much do I get in child support? So they all want to know how much they're going to get, whether it's spousal support or child support. And it's like, well, hold on a second, because there's something that comes before that. You have to have a timeshare percentage, and that's what your child support is based upon. So you might have, legal custody and physical custody, and that might be split, but the timeshare dictates how much child support you'll have. So then you go on to the spousal support. Was it a long-term marriage? Is it over 10 years? That's lifetime spousal support. And, if it's under 10 years, then it's half the length of the relationship. So
wow.
So there's different, things to take into consideration when you're doing the timeline.
Now, is there like some kind of like cheat sheet that they kind of go off of for that stuff? Like if you were together for 5 years, it's this kind of percentage, or if it's 10 years, it's like this. Like, is that kind of how it goes, or is it specific, like a fingerprint to every single case?
You know what? There's a guideline for sure, and a lot of it's by statute, and that's what the courts will go by. But a lot of it has to do with the finances. They want to know, you have to give your tax. Both sides have to submit their taxes for the last couple of years, pay stubs and that kind of thing. Ability to work comes in. The judge might impute income to one of the spouses if they're not working and say, look, you're a licensed contractor. You can work and make $40, $100 an hour, whatever it's going to be. And you're choosing not to work, so I'm going to impute that's your income, whether you're working or not.
Wow. Yeah.
Interesting. So as far as all the cases being the same, they're all different.
Yeah, I can imagine that to be the case. Michelle Paul, in the hot seat today, dropping number one rule. Didn't even know there was a number one rule until we had to drop it live. That's what Stash Nation, that's why we got your back, gang, and I appreciate you guys for hanging out. We're tackling a tough subject today, tracking down some important local people, talking about a very important thing that's happening very kind of silently, right? Things that aren't people, you're not going to be posting on Facebook that you're super excited about your divorce, right? This isn't one of the things you grandstand about. It's a thing that you kind of have to deal with, that you're not proud of, but critical, because how that goes can sometimes be an inflection point directly proportional to how the second or third half of your life goes. Would you not agree with that?
I absolutely agree.
And that's why we got Michelle Paul now. So by the way, if you want to track down Michelle privately, you can voyeur in on all of her wares and her brilliant victories at sandiego-divorcelaw.com, or you can call her the old-fashioned way at 619-379-9828. I'll give you that local number one more time. It's 619-379-9828. Now, Michelle, coming up, this is a very challenging part of the conversation when you imagine that this is somebody who you trusted most of, if not all of your life with, and then they just flipped it on you. So what are the 3 questions you got to ask immediately if you're on the other side of that conversation? We'll hit that up with Michelle when we come right back. Real Talk Radio San Diego.